These principles have guided her big brush and illuminated journal offerings. Barbara has taught and performed widely and was part of the creative process team at the Authentic Leadership in Action conferences for many years. She is a founding member of Sky Lake and lives right down the hill in High Falls, New York. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome you, Barbara, to the series Dharma Art and the Artist.
Thank you, Eric. So, where do we begin?
Well, I'm so curious as you're bridging this world of Western calligraphic arts, and I'm curious on your background and how you met Chogyam Trungpa, who really brought you into this Eastern approach to the calligraphic arts.
Hmm. Well, I had always had this fascination with writing, the actual act of writing, and I was working as a calligrapher in the Bay Area and in a kind of wonderful book arts revival there during that time. And even though I had been raised in a really good Protestant, socially conscious family, it was a time there in the 70s where there was interest. I was in California, there was openness to other traditions. And I think that I actually had a brief encounter with Chogyam Trungpa very soon after he arrived in this country around 1970. I did went to a seminar he gave in Los Angeles. I had an interview with him, which I basically didn't even know what to ask. You know, I just was sort of quiet. And he finally said, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I make rainwater herbal shampoo." Clearly, it wasn't about what we were saying. It was just an encounter that happened then. But then about 6 years went by, from 70 to 76, and I was living in Berkeley, and I was watching all these artists go to Boulder, Colorado. They were just heading out there, these poets and these dancers and these theater people. And so something was pulling me towards that. So I went to Naropa, traveled there in 1976, and then moved in 79, went back 78, 79, and then moved fully there and began teaching at Naropa. And I was teaching Western calligraphy because that's really what I'd been trained in. The alphabets from my palette of colors was the alphabets from the Roman era to the Renaissance, when books were all handmade before the printing press. And I remember asking Trungpa at one point, "Is it okay that I'm teaching Western calligraphy at this Buddhist college?" And he said, "You go into your own tradition and it will lead you to everything."
Mm.
So I realized at that point, Eric, or it kind of began to become clear to me that calligraphers have a natural propensity towards spiritual traditions. Christian monks writing out manuscripts, Japanese monks writing out sutras, Islamic calligraphers creating these astonishing mazes of characters, slowing you down to read it, Sanskrit. It's something about that act that has a naturally synchronizing, bringing the mind and the body together. And so it made sense that I got drawn to a Buddhist tradition, which I think I had some psychological leaning towards. And then I was attracted to a man who was a calligrapher himself, had come from Tibet and moved through India and England into America, and in that process had gotten very interested in Japanese culture and had begun to work with brushes. I began to work with brushes, so there was some kind of mirroring there. But I think the deeper thing was that he was quite unpredictable. And I think there was something in me that was attracted to a teacher who was a little bit of a stretch
Hmm.
for me.
And so you began teaching at Naropa Western calligraphic arts. Wow.
Western, yeah.
Yeah. And yet that essence of mark making is still there, of course, right? And what was your encounter calligraphically with Chogyam Trungpa? What did that look like initially? When did that really you both meet on the page?
Hmm. I became um, I began to assist him at his calligraphic sessions. So I was in there as in that serving capacity, which was great because I could get in there and watch closely. And then I washed the brushes afterwards, which was a good thing to do. It was like I kind of set up and cleaned up and then was watching very closely what was happening and the way he approached the page. And I remember one time coming back from a session with him and I saw how simple it was. He was, of course, doing Tibetan characters with a brush. So they weren't familiar to me. I didn't really ever learn Tibetan. I've always had this allegiance to the alphabet that I was born into. That's where I feel that one can really take the leap. That was true for me anyway. But I remember watching him and just coming back to the studio afterwards and writing out a quote of Sappho, Dawn, the Queenly Dawn. And I wrote it in italic with a reed pen, and I wrote it as simply as I could. So I think it was like no extra flourish. So he was working on me at that point for sure.
Hmm. And washing the brushes, such a rite of passage, right?
That's
Like
right.
sharpening the tools, if you will. And I mean, speaking of tools, that transition from the pen, right? It's also good to know the rainwater shampoo. When you say a working calligraphic artist, I think, what does that look like, or what does that feel like?
Well, that's funny because I was actually designing the labels for rainwater herbal shampoo also. So
Okay.
the
Yeah.
calligraphy was in there. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so thinking about this movement from the pen to the brush, right? What was that like? You know, just in the body.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Western writing was done with I think the belief is the story is that those Roman letters up on those stone monuments, there was a brush in there. They were originally painted with a brush, a flat edge brush on the stone, and then they were carved. But then when books began to be made on vellum, the reed pen, broad edged, again, not a brush, smaller, began to be the tool, and then a quill, a turkey quill, and then eventually later on metal pens. So I was working with the edge of this thick and thin, and it was somewhat challenging to get the ink to flow on the surface, and it was a hard tool. And I think there was something about the brush that it gave no resistance. You made a mark immediately, and yet you couldn't control it in the same ways. So I think the softness of the tool intrigued me.
And it sounds like it also sort of um, informed that spirit of loosening and yet still refined, right? But loosening
Yeah,
that approach,
that's
or distilling it to a more of an essence, right? And I know some of your work, right, works with a big brush, so that's an even, right, talking about this pinpointed.
right,
So
right.
yeah, take me into the enlargement to the large brush. What was that like, or how did that happen? And
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll say a little bit about that, and then we could go back and watch the video of the brush writing first.
okay.
So, and then we'll go on to the big brush videos. The story the kind of seminal story for me in terms of the attraction to the big brush was sitting in a seminar, Dharma Art Seminar in 1978, a warm evening in Boulder, and Trungpa was sitting at the front of the room, hundreds and hundreds of people there, and I was showing up in my with all the precision of what I was bringing to that world as a Western calligrapher and just who I was psychologically. And he said, it's possible to make a brushstroke that expresses your whole life. Now, what I heard, or what I thought, was a really big brushstroke. And I thought, as I was thinking about that today, a lot of people would say that because we all want to live big.
Mm.
And I think there was something particularly for me that it was like some inner teacher was saying, you need to work big. You need to expand on the tools somewhat. So it did lead me to working with bigger and bigger brushes at that point.
Mm. Well, and
Yeah.
I think there's an inherent sort of relationship to the whole body, right? So I think I
Yes.
work with wood, so there's something about working on a very fine level that is almost, it's almost skull shaped, right? Like it's in the head, lives in the head. And
Mhm.
then when I move to a larger piece of wood, right, and it's on the floor, my whole body is, of course,
Yeah.
always engaged. And yet there's more of a relationship. I can almost step into the piece. And it feels like with the big brush, there's, make a big Enzo, you could almost crawl through the Enzo or something like that. Is there a quality of that embodiment that happens?
Yeah, you can't, you could say it has to engage the body. It can't just be something that's happening out here.
Mhm.
It, it, it just naturally happens. It's not like, I think I should engage the body. It's just, that's the only way you can do it. So I think that was the attraction for me.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's such a fascinating process, right? Enlarging the tools and yet sort of honing your vision while you expanded from the Western calligraphic tradition. And yet there's still that essence of calligraphy that I'm curious about. I know you speak sort of about a uniting process that takes place in the calligraphic arts.
A synchronizing, a joining of
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
Yeah.
Did you want to show the video now, or is that helpful to understand?
Yeah, why don't we show the brush and poetry unfolding, which is a video of Chogyam Trungpa's words and my brush writing along with it, and then we can move into one of that first big brush video. So, Cindy, if you want to bring that one up, and I'll just say that this is a poem that Chogyam Trungpa wrote, and it has the word drala in it, which is a Tibetan word that is speaking, that's a name for the energies of the world, the natural energies of the world that are there to support us. So I think everything else is it's sort of his message to us now that he's gone. And the music is by the inimitable Steve Gorn. Many of you will recognize it. So let's listen and watch.
Wow. Well, what an amazing meeting place for those three arts,
Yeah.
and an amazing pace to take in the poetry, the music, and then to just visibly watch you work. Right, is another part of the process that is such so informative. What was that process like for you?
Well, as I watch it each time, as it starts, I think, oh my God, this is going to take such a long time to write this out, and I'm going to be watching this again. I mean, this is just in the watching. I mean, in the doing, it's there. It's timeless. You're just in it. But to watch it, I'm contrasting it with, how there are these things, these videos where someone is doing a graphic harvest and it's speeded up to the speed of reading, so that it's way faster than anyone could draw or write. This has a quality of slowing, I feel, when you view it. You just, okay, we're just in, and I think that's what the calligraphic act does. It slows one down and grounds, and certainly with words, it gives voice to um, a vision. Uh, that's his voice there. And so calligraphers are channels. They are taking words either from someone that they admire, they want to let come through, or sometimes one's own words, and you're giving it form. And so it has a slowing, connecting, and ultimately satisfying quality, sort of on the edge there. Yeah.
And did you find those same qualities, as you spoke about, embedded in the Western tradition of calligraphic arts? That same slowing, that same intentionality. How, yeah, what was that process like, right? Coming to the Eastern tradition of calligraphic arts and yet then returning and diving deeply into the Western tradition. Where did you find?
Well,
Uh,
the Western was always, I never left that. I just brought it along, and I was creating this book arts program at Naropa. So, and the poetics that was happening there, it was just I started working with the brush, basically. And also I started working with larger and larger brushes, as we said, that so what I felt was I wanted a range from the precision that you saw in that kind of writing that we just had in the video. It was very quick, and I was working with that pointed brush. I'd like to show the video of the big brush in action to get a sense of what the other range was that I began to work with, and also invite other people to be part of. And so this video is actually taken, it was done at Sky Lake about 2007. And Sky Lake has this big lawn out in front under these huge white pine trees. And there's a shuffleboard court there from many, many years ago that's all covered with, was covered with pine needles. We swept it off, and it was a perfect setting for this big brush work. So maybe we could take a look at that, and that'll lead us into this bigger scale, whole body. You can see the grounding aspect of what happens here. Sort of settling, looking at the expanse, moving into action. Priming the brush in the ink, and considering the space.
Oh my gosh.
Someone commenting.
Big one.
And now I'm making the human mark in red, the completion. And then the bow.
So there's clearly a dance that happens there. I mean, it's very visible to see that dancing, and yet also that grounding that leads you right into that movement. What you mentioned the grounding aspect that you sort of you were pointing to as you began. What is that like? Can you describe that?
Yeah, this is a great point. I love it when you find an activity that you don't say, I should get grounded. It would be good if I was grounded to do this. I want to be a more settled person. It's just an activity where you can't do it unless you're grounded. So it just evokes the state that you're wanting. So it has this quality. It's something about the big scale. As you could see, I was sort of trying to get a sense of, you don't really know what's going to happen. You're jumping in. And so all you've got is that kind of body settled, and knowing that when you're working with a big brush, it will ground you also. And it's horsehair, and it's you and the brush and the paper, and you're trying not to step in the ink. That's, but beyond that, you're just kind of starting with something big. And then this is where it's going to lead into our next video. I start with a sense of heaven or big gesture. That seems to be what happens first, naturally. And then you start to ground, the stroke gets grounded. It's like it changes and you begin to settle and connect further down on the page. So that's heaven and earth. This is where I'm working with Chogyam Trungpa's Heaven, Earth, and Human principles that he presented in such an alive, personal way. And then the human mark kind of completes something, but it's small and it's warm. It's red and it's fiery, and you look and see, where is the human wanted here? Where's the right place for it in relation to heaven and earth? So you're really working with, the orientation of the whole thing through a brushstroke. And I guess I feel in the bigness of it, it amplifies it, and you tend to do it with other people around. So it became more of a community event. So those workshops that I've done at Sky Lake for many years, working together with the big brush, what I was led to were these authentic leadership conferences where I was asked to create a calligraphic experience for 250 people. And I had 45 minutes to do it. I had 30 brushes that I made out of horsehair. I had 30 people coming up at a time, and I led them through a process of heaven, earth, and human with the brushstroke. So it was giving everyone, they were smaller brushes, but they're still big. They're about this big. I call them my mezzo brushes. It was giving everybody a chance to see what comes to them. They say there's the Chinese saying is calligraphy is a picture of the mind. So you just are getting immediate feedback. I wasn't doing characters, I wasn't doing letters, but the bones of it was heaven, earth, and human. How to begin, then how to ground and settle, and then how to resolve. So that was the journey that we would take in these with these brushstrokes. So what I'd like to show now is that what happened at these authentic leadership conferences is that I would be asked to come in and do a closing brushstroke for the whole conference. So that's another kind of channeling. So I'd like to show this And just again to see the sense of how I get settled before I start. And so, Cindy, why don't you show the authentic leadership final stroke? Did a lot of bowing with these brush strokes. It's like you really needed to have something. I'm about ready to begin. Settle. Move towards the brush. Ground in the body. Consider. So it's a little slowed down. There we go. It's caught up now. Where's the human wanted? Where's its right spot? This ended up having two humans. Such a relief. Oh my God. So maybe, Cindy, we could just show some of those four ending strokes from four of those authentic leadership conferences to just give a sense of, these were all about 12 feet long, about 4 feet wide, and what happened in each of those settings. Here was one, heaven, coming down, earth in the middle, grounding, and then human. Next one. This one had a very dragon-like quality and an amazing quality as I came down to the center of the brush sort of splattering out. And then I grounded from there, and then the human in the center had a dragon head quality. Next one. Different kind of heaven, dancing, moving. Next one. That the stroke with the white lines on it is in Japan is called flying white, and I always love it when those lines come through. And yeah, good. Okay, so Eric, I want to do something on the spot, but did you have anything else you wanted to ask me before I move into that?
Well, yeah, thank you. I mean, so many questions. There's so many beautiful ways that the practice itself kind of draws one in and moves the eye over the strokes itself. And of course, I'm curious about just what you've learned by sharing these very essential body practices of calligraphy, especially as we move into, it's all keyboard now, right? It's all sort of, not all, luckily, some of us still work with a pen, but yeah, just curious on if there's any insights that you could briefly share about what you've experienced sharing the calligraphic arts in an age of typeface in this type of keyboard.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And the alphabet is still out there. It's still working on us in all these typefaces. It's all around us, But this is a particular embodied contact. I say getting on the page of your life. There are a lot of different ways to get on the page, with handwriting, with brushstroke, with pencil. So when you get on the page with a big brush, you have an experience of being in touch and moving. You know, you don't just, you might pause there for a moment, but you got to get moving. The ink is pooling, you know, so it's sometimes I think it's like, you know, it's diving off the diving board. It happens so fast, and then you're in the water. So it's a sense, my gratitude for this is that by offering this in these community events, and now some on Zoom as well, I get to participate with others in getting on the page again. And that, in these times, is so important for kind of our own connection with delight, with trusting our life, and kind of resilience. I just feel like it's one of those embodied practices that strengthens the spirit. So it's that synchronizing, that coming together.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking that. Okay, well, I would like to end with something happening on the spot here. So, Cindy, can you invite my iPhone to come on here? Little pause here.
You'll have to start the camera on it.
Okay. Start video. Now I've got my video going. Okay, we got it. All right, I'm moving the keyboard away. I'm going to offer two things. The first is a brushstroke in a similar way to those big brush events, but I'm working on a smaller paper. So I'll do a heaven stroke that will lead to earth in one stroke, and then I will make a human mark with the vermilion. So approaching the page has a trembling quality. You don't actually know what's going to happen. You're letting something come to you. Rinpoche called it a positive panic. So we practice that here. Then we load the brush. It's the quality of the approach, then the connection through the mark, and then the appreciation of, that's what happened that time. And now, 3 lines, kind of going back to our working with words, since this is very much my path, is also working with the verbal expression, but I'm going to do 3 words, and the first will be a quality of heaven or space. So I'll start with that. see what comes. Utilizing the alphabets in my repertoire. Quiet. Then the earth word that counterbalances heaven is in conversation with it. Moving. Somehow that movement, quiet was so still, and then the blackness kind of gives it more of an earth richness, but it's touching the space. And then the human, the feeling. Trembling. After all this, that quality is good. So, Cindy, why don't you, we'll turn off the camera. Here's the brushstroke. This is a practice that any of us can do. You don't have to be a calligrapher. You just let a word come that speaks to the space, another word come that grounds you, and then a feeling. And in my experience, by the time you're at the third one, that's where I am right now. So it has a restorative quality, which is a good thing in our world. So I would love to, we have about 10 minutes. Shall we just open it to any questions, Eric? Things that came up for people? Comments?
Yeah. If you've had any thoughts that you'd like to have us explore together, any questions that have come up, we'll open the chat window and
Or you can speak them out as well. Anything that you noticed, in observing any of this? John.
Barbara, could you say a little bit about how you hold the brush differently when you're doing different strokes? And obviously, when you grab the big brush, it's like, you got a bear that you're dancing with. And then when you're doing the fine ones, when I learned Tibetan calligraphy, my teacher stopped my mind where he said, you hold the pen between your index and thumb fingers so you can turn the brush.
Wow.
And I had never held a pen or a brush anywhere like that, but be curious how you play with holding the brush.
Yeah. Well, John, I teach this grounding brush ichi practice that I learned from Ed Young, a Tai Chi practice. And in that, actually, I'll show it with this Oriental brush. You hold it in a way that is very different with these two fingers. You always hold the brush vertically, and everything that happens happens in the hairs. When I work with the brush, it's true. There's a quality of firmness, but not tension in it, because the tool, I can't say that I just hold it this way. I do support with my other fingers, but the hand is always moving with it. It's never static, it always has a quality of sort of supporting. And when I learned that one stroke practice, it was like the hand and the fingers were like the foot in the stirrup. It's controlling from that spot. Yeah. So the delicacy of it, but the lack of tension, and you're in a relationship with this being. It's training you and you're training it, and it's a dialogue going on.
Yeah, thank you. I can see it how you're holding it now.
We've got a couple questions here, Barbara, for you. One is sort of just a comment about you breathing while you were practicing. I noticed that as well, right? A synchronizing of the breath with the body, and certainly akin to different ways that we observe and connect with the breath, right, in a sitting practice or other more formal practices. There's a question, maybe you can explore the 3 words again that you wrote there, and maybe how you access them.
Yeah, so this is very much working, as I said, in the big brush. There's a quality of, or maybe let me back it up. When I wanted to present this brush practice at these leadership conferences, I needed to find a structure that one could follow, to be held by. So heaven, what comes first? Earth, what comes second? Human, what resolves? 1, 2, 3, beginning, middle, and end. So when I did these 3 words here, the first was just, how, this could be a whole sentence. I just did 1 word, but what's the description of the space here? And how can I write it in a way that the fullness, you don't write quiet in a agitated way. I call these onomatopoeia words. So they reflect their meaning. And then what's the counterbalance? It just was, something was moving, earth was moving. Sometimes I look out my window and just describe 3 things that I'm seeing in the sky, on the earth, and then a detail. But in this case, it was just, what's the earth, what's holding this space of quiet? Something active. I felt sort of our whole dialogue here was moving. And then that feeling at the end of, even with all of this, I could feel that my hand was shaking a little bit. And the shaking of the hand has a kind of beauty to it. We want to be steady, but it's actually a beautiful human quality. So I'm feeling my way through these 3. And that I do that in many different ways, with my illustrated journaling, with 3 lines, with 3 words, with 3 brush strokes. It's like, what sets the tone? heaven, what responds to it and makes a conversation, earth, and then what's the witness here, or what's the human view? So I work with these three over and over and over again, and I feel held by them in my, it's a holding environment for any creative process.
Yeah, and that sort of segues into this other question that is mentioned here by Sarah. She's thinking of how to apply these principles, not just sounds like of calligraphics, but to a natural motif or a scene. And I know you work somewhat with landscapes or other designs in the landscape. Do you have any suggestions for how to sort of translate some of this calligraphic work into working with a landscape or a natural scene?
Well, I do this with my field sketching, with my illustrated journaling when I'm outdoors. It's you go out, you don't know what you're going to find. You sort of wait. You're letting something come to you. But the instruction that I've created for myself is I just draw something that's in the sky first, or touching the sky, or moving through the sky. And I put that sort of on the upper part of the page. And then I draw something that's on the ground, or, moving, growing out of. And then I draw a detail. So I work with three elements on the page. They may not be right next to each other. It's kind of a sketchbook format. But it's three voices in the room of the page, and they're talking. And then I add, because I like to add words into images, I find that I find out what that's about for me when I describe what I drew. Clouds drifting in the sky, grass flattened on the ground, one flower opening. I often find that the last word that I write, and I've done this with kids a lot too, the last word that I write is a description of myself. So it kind of brings you into, that's where I am. And it's not always happy, but it's real. And again, it's like a deeper delight, access to some deeper delight. So it's a little journey that you go through if you follow these principles that will bring you to where you are, which I feel is the contemplative practice. Is we find out, that's where I am right now. So yeah, I work with it outdoors a lot.
Beautiful. And I think with that, what I'm hearing when you describe the heaven, earth, and human is that the human is not just the witness, but also is the channel in the process, right? But is able to witness that channeling or
Yeah.
bridging of the heaven and earth, right? Almost literally and metaphorically.
Yeah. It's funny, I used that word witness before. I don't know if I ever have, but it just popped out. But yeah, it's very much the looking, seeing, understanding, insight, and maybe a little leap happens there in the human. It's or an image or something, it can be a little surprise, but you don't know what it's going to be until you've already taken the journey through heaven and earth, and then you discover something. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and that it seems a little bit continued here by a comment by Stephanie. She says, "I'm always struck by the way your practice sits at the space between creating an image and creating an event." So that also sort of channeling that it's certainly an image is created, right? And then yet the experience and the action. Yeah.
Right. It's a journey that I've gone through in the creation that's brought me to some fresh understanding. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's some comments here just about reverence and action. I think that's clearly something that I feel from how you approach this practice is such a such a beautiful reverence for the practice, and as you've spoken about how it invites that presence. And a comment here by Leah seems that it is a, quote, performance of aware, spontaneous action.
Hmm.
Do you want to comment on that? Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I just like that it has a very naturally sacred quality. Not like I should be sacred now. It's just it happens in the act. It it brings that quality that, I was thinking about leading up to our event today, and friends of mine know I get all kind of worked up about it, and that it's because it really matters. It's not just like, oh, well, whatever. It's like we want to show up and have it actually matter. And so the approach to the page is one of reverence and respect. And yeah, you could see that the bowing slows me down. I don't just charge onto the page. It's like, okay, I got to get my bearings here. So yeah. And then what did Leah say? It was a spontaneity.
A performance of aware, spontaneous action.
Performance of aware, spontaneous action. I like that. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, those years at Naropa, I've been working very precise in my studio, lining my pages and everything. And then Jerry Grinelli said, come into my jazz class and make some brushstrokes for my students. And it was like, I don't really do that, and then dancers and then storytellers. And so the performative thing brought me out of that, the constraint of my precision. And now, I like moving back and forth between it. It's like they're both important, but yeah, our life is a performance, we're improvising, and doing this just enlivens it in a particular way, and it gives us information, insight about where we are at each moment. The calligraphy is a picture of the mind.
Mm. Mm. And maybe we've got one last question here from Eloise, sort of speaking directly to that last word in your 3-line poem. How do you step into that trembling? And I think you use that great line by Chogyam Trungpa, the positive panic, right? This sort of, we build up because we care, right? As you mentioned, we really, these are meaningful experiences for us. And yet, how do you step boldly into that trembling?
Good question. I was thinking of you, Eloise, when that word came out, because of, we want to be steady. And yet I think the trembling is really where we connect with people. It's some kind of opening, not in the sense of, oh, I'm really nervous. It's not that. It's that I can let myself tremble a little bit, and that kind of brings everybody in. And then I have contact, I have companionship in the trembling. Thank you.
Yeah, well, what a beautiful way to close and really point to that humanity in this larger process and gathering. And so, yeah, it's been such a pleasure to be with you, Barbara, and thank you so much. And maybe we'll close with the bell.
We'll close with the bell, and yeah, I am glad to stick around for about 10 minutes. Anybody who wants to stay in the room, but I do feel all of you out there, and you all kind of did that with me, those 3 words, that brushstroke, and it's kind of the Zoom magic that happens here. And I hope that anything you saw here you can utilize in your own way. This is casting the seeds out there. So thank you so much for just being here. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'll invite the bell here and we'll share a moment together, and then we can open the space for more formal sharing.
Great. Oh, it's great to hear that bell, Eric. You know, it just goes off into space, and it reminded me like calligraphy is a gesture in space that just leaves a track behind. It's like, you know, so the bell just dissolves. It's the last stroke.
So I'll just make one last comment that there is that link for any donations if you're feeling called to share and support this process. All donations are appreciated by Sky Lake, and thank you all for joining us.
And you want to mention Daniel's event on June 6th?
Yeah. So it's actually on June 15th. I have here on my calendar.
Okay.
And yeah, Daniel Berlin will be presenting on recognition in the elastic moment. So then we'll dive more into that visual art. Daniel's a painter and I know has a studio practice. So I'm excited to welcome him and see what he has to offer. So please join us again, June 15th. That'll be the last of this four-month installment. And yeah, we'll continue the journey together.
Great to see
I'm
you.
unmuting to say thank you. Great to see you, Barbara. It's
Oh,
Leah.
thank you, Leah.
I'll
Thank
come
you.
see you soon in
Yes,
person.
yes.
In the Sprung. Oh gosh. And hello everyone. Hope to see you around Sky Lake or in the universe of mindfulness, whether in person or in heart. Thank you.
Barbara, could I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So especially when you did the first one with the sky and earth and then the red mark.
Yeah.
So do you ever get this feeling when you're done of like, oh, I want to change something?
Definitely.
And what's inside of you?
Yeah. You know, that's an interesting thing. I didn't mention that in the big brush, the big sessions, we fold them all up afterwards because you can't possibly save them. It's like moving a pond or something, you just fold it up. So you look at it and you go, that was it. I fold it up. Look at it and go, you fold it up. So it's an interesting part of that. When you let brush strokes hang around, some of them have got it. And some, well, that's what that one was, So it's a good practice of acceptance of how it turned out. And then you just can let it go. And maybe there's some that, you get that discernment of what brushstroke really connected, but they don't all do it. It's showing up as best we can. And then we get to work with disappointment and, all of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sometimes it's very poignant to fold up those brush strokes, and sometimes it's a great relief, so.
Barbara,
Yes.
it really softened my heart for you to share tonight. So I thank you so much. I want to hear if you feel a sense of poetry surfacing from yourself as you're doing it. I mean, you open poetry inside of me, so I'm interested to know if you experience it that way.
Yeah. I am there was a moment at Naropa. A dear friend of mine named Susan Edwards said to me, she and I were working together creating that book arts program. And I was writing out lots of quotes by famous people doing that channeling work. And she said, why are you writing out quotes of other people? Why don't you write out your own words? And I was sort of defensive and like, well, there's lots of wonderful things that have been written and I I like to write out famous quotes, but it worked on me and it led to my book, True Nature, of writing my own voice. And that has led to the distillation into poetry, working with that 3-line practice each day. And yeah, it's sort of just natural poetry comes forth when you let it take that form. So I think I have this sense that everybody has this artistic nature, and each of us just activate it through these different ways, maybe multiple ways.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mm. Nice to see everybody.
Thank you, Barbara.
Sydney, hi.
Hi.
I just see an S, but I see your name. Glad you were here.
The thing that's on my screen right now is seemed like a little too much.
You have an intense backdrop. You do. Yeah.
But that was great. I really enjoyed it. It was a real pleasure to hear you explain it, to watch you in action,
Great.
to feel your closeness and tenderness to the act.
Mm. Yeah. It's some alive space that we all want to, I believe we all want to be in. And it does take courage to step in each time, but it's kind of like jumping into fresh water or something, you know, it's exhilarating. Yeah. And I have my own hesitations. I think I do things like this so that I'll do it. And I set up classes so I'll keep doing it. Ways of supporting each other in stepping through into that not knowing and making a mark anyway. And then you're surprised.
Barbara,
Yes.
you know, when you're working with a big brush, it just looks so incredibly heavy. And my back starts to hurt, the small of my back. And then it's so immense and weighted. I almost can envision it lifting you off the earth because you're making the heaven mark anyway. And, you know, you really could imagine that it's going to just pull you up.
But Leslie, it's just the opposite. It just pins you down. You don't go riding off like a a witch, you know. It's like you are so down.
Both for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't work with that really big one very much anymore. That was just like too huge. But those mezzo brushes make beautiful big strokes, and you still, yeah, you really let the brush. You're riding it. You're riding it. It's like you're riding a horse, and you're controlling, but the horse is drawing you as well. So that's a pretty cool situation to find yourself in. Yeah.
Thanks.
I love that. I've never felt I was going to lift off when I held that big brush. And you really have to get your hips underneath you. You don't want to be like out in front, you know, with it. You got to, yeah, it's very good for strengthening the back. Wow.
Hi, Barbara. It was wonderful. I really enjoyed
Oh,
it.
I'm so glad you made it.
And one thing that that struck me is like what a difference from the kind of calligraphy you learn at school, and you know how letters are constructed in the Western tradition, and how just opposite it feels,
Right.
to be so
Yeah.
expressive.
And I am a great lover of handwriting, and I love working with people to take their handwriting and enliven it, you know? So many of us weren't maybe trained in handwriting in that way, or maybe you were in Britain. But yeah, the tightness, it's like how to have handwriting. It's that amazing tightrope you're on, that you're working with the form of the letters, the feeling of what you want to say and express, and then the constraint of those letters, and you're working them, you know. So I feel that handwriting is, I'm going to do a workshop called Slow Handwriting in June. I'm going to tell you about Dunstan,
Okay.
let you know about it,
I'd
to
like to
get
do
us all into our, because it's so close at hand, everybody has it, it's completely unique. And how can we have a hand that is truly pleasurable, you know, again, as a counterbalance to, I love typing, but there's something that happens when we handwrite that's different. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Thank you. It was wonderful.
liberating handwriting, great.
Mhm.
Well, any last comments before we close the room and let everyone leave the space here? I really hope to see you all in person, and in the meantime, I'm kind of having a wonderful time teaching on Zoom too. A lot of great stuff happens. So I may keep doing that for people that are far away. But we'll get back in the room together and splash some ink around. You, Florence, yes. Slow handwriting workshop. Yes, I will. I'll see if I can let all of you know. It's a Shambhala online. I think it's on June 11th. It's for 2 hours, and you should be able to find it if you Google slow handwriting Shambhala. We'll do the 3-line poetry practice too. Okay. Bye, everybody.